So one of the things that you do work on is sort of, I don't know if you want to call it bi-directional or mutual
Yeah.
intimate partner violence. Can you give us like what that is?
So ideally, I would like to see the way we look at the issue of intimate partner violence, not just violence against women or violence against men issue. Ideally, I think we develop the sense that these are very specific issues related to the relationships. And ideally, we start thinking about the types of relationships and where the violence happens. So, and since the intimate relationships don't just happen, right? I mean, they take some time to develop them. And so we may see some development or what we call escalation of violence in relationship or de-escalation of violence over time. So that is why I think it's a very different mindset, very different from violence against women. Violence against women, are static issues. We're just looking at the prevalence rates. We look at, they're victims or not victims. With mutuality and bidirectionality, we look at the interaction within the couple. We're looking at the type of relationships that can have different dynamic over time, depending on certain risk factors. So we know there are several types of violent relationships, thanks to Michael Johnson. So he identified four major types of violence. He said we shouldn't think about violence as just one thing. And we all probably know some of the couples that have more of situational couple violence. So this is where people just fight, sometimes throw things at each other, call names. And again, it has no strong controlling component. It just happens with many couples. In fact, 60% of all violence, it looks like this is what it is, situational couple violence. People just fight. They don't go to the police. It just happens. They resolve the issues or they seek psychotherapy. But then there is about 10% of couples that experience the very dangerous type of violence called intimate terrorism. And this is where there is a clear perpetrator and a usually clear victim. And it can be women who are victims of intimate terrorists or male female terrorists, and it can be men who are victims of female intimate terrorists. And in the literature right now, we see a lot of cases of when women are victims of intimate terrorists, but it's growing too. We see many more men who suffer from these terrorists again in their families. So what I think about is that relationships develop and we see some duality, we see some complexity in their relationship, escalation. So what we do in mutual or bidirectional violence, we actually try to look at how both partners in the couple, if they both victims and if they both perpetrators, rather than like WHO, World Health Organization, is doing research on or asking only women and asking only about victimization experiences. This is what they get. We know violence against women in different countries. We have no idea if these women were violent as well, right? We don't know who the victims are. So what is important to do is to ask these questions. And what we see is the majority of couples experience violence bidirectionally. So in our recent review we just published this year, it's about 53% of couples experience violence bidirectionally. It means both partners can be victims and both partners can be perpetrators. And the most interesting thing, next one, is the next prevalent type, is that when women are unilaterally are perpetrators of abuse, followed by only men unilaterally are perpetrators of abuse. So this is what we see. And again, this is a next controversial topic in intimate partner violence literature. It looks like right now there is more recognition that men can be victims of abuse. Even some of the feminist researchers talk to this saying, we see that. Okay, so it's more understanding that we need to do something about it. But when it comes to bidirectionality or mutuality, it's still a very difficult topic to discuss because some call it, you call it blaming the victim, they like to say. Well, it has nothing to do with blaming anybody. It's about understanding who is violent and what these consequences of this violence will be. If it's just a woman who initiates abuse by screaming at a partner, throwing things at him, right? That's initiation of violence. So what the next step will be, we need to see. It can be escalation, it can be de-escalation. So to think in these terms, to develop better instrument, to develop better screening for the practitioners, to see what type of couple we deal with, and if the chances of escalation to lethal violence, to homicide, are actually very high there. Because this is what we see when we look at homicides. We see some of these couple fights a lot before, and then finally somebody kills somebody. And it's not just one intimate terrorist kills a victim. It may be a victim who kills an intimate terrorism in self-defense, or it can be just both partners fighting and it just happens that she had a knife.
Right. So when you said 50 something percent, you were talking about of the situations where there is intimate partner abuse, that 50 something percent of them, it's bidirectional. Okay.
53% among the couple, among all violent couples, all of them who experience violence. The type of this violence, 53%, more than half of all this violence will be bidirectional in nature in the intimate relationship. And then the next type, about 30%, will be when women are unilaterally perpetrators of abuse. And then the remaining, it will be when men are unilaterally perpetrators of abuse.
And it makes sense. I mean, one of the things I'm hearing you say is that, like, when you just ask men or women, or you just ask one person, are you a victim? That what you lose is all the situations in which it's bidirectional, and that bidirectional abuse is just a phenomenologically like different thing than when there's a single perpetrator.
It's a very different concept for us to understand as well. And in terms of measurement, ideally, we just talk to couples. We just kind of talk to both in the relationship and we
Mhm.
ask them separately, ideally, right? So seeing their understanding what happens and other partners, and we kind of match and we see what happens. We've seen these studies. They have very small samples though, because it's difficult to do and both partners agree to that. What more likely to happen is that use of the conflict tactic scales developed by Mary Strauss. So conflict tactic scales is the most broadly used scale to measure intimate partner violence, both perpetration and victimization components. And why this scale is so popular and used in most of the countries and used by Statistics Canada is because it has two questions there. One is about victimization experience. My partner has kicked me or kicked me in the past 5 years. But then there's the next question, I kicked my partner. So that is why this is how we know that they did this both. What is still missing is the context. And we get these questions a lot. Like, but how do you know? Maybe she kicked him because he was abusive. Fair point. That is why please add questions on context. And that is why some studies add questions on context. When you said that you kicked him, what was it? Was it in response to violence or it was an initiation of violence? So we can always add. But conflict tactic skills is a tool that measures if violence took place, and what type was it? Was it bidirectional? They were both perpetrators and victims, or is just one-way violence?
When it is bidirectional, are both partners typically engaging in the same type of abuse?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is what I don't know. This is what I cannot say. We're still at the stage when I think we're still fighting for broader acceptance of even narrative of bidirectionality and mutuality. And that's sad. I've always saying that we have to focus fully on studying the phenomenon rather than fighting for this kind of public recognition or even within the academic community. It's harder to get grants. It's harder to get publications when many people still don't consider it as an important issue, or they consider it as going against some mainstream ideas, which are more important. So that is why when time passes by and we see more understanding that, okay, this is really important, we want to have answers to the question like, it is a similar types of abuse, or if it's more escalation, or who de-escalates and under which circumstances. These are all very important questions. They're next in our research.